Hello beautiful people, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today we are talking about cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. So let's get started. So hopefully all of you have had an opportunity to watch my cultural appropriation video. What is cultural appropriation? I will link that in the description box if you haven't, because there's a ton of information about cultural appropriation there. But I also invite you to do your own research and to connect with other authors, YouTubers, public figures, like literally anyone who you feel you connect with as an authority figure or as a person you feel is inspirational or interesting, or just someone you connect with who you can share that with, because I don't know everything. I just know what I'm learning, and therefore I can only share what I'm learning. So I just really invite you to also do your own research, because you might find that my understanding and my opinion differs from other people's. So find what's true for you and expand on what your understanding is. So today we're talking about cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation, and the way that I want to do that is by sharing an example of something from my life and how I am working to be more appreciative in a cultural sense, connecting to my cultural roots as well as respecting other cultures. About November or December 2019, I made a video for my YouTube channel centered around a DNA test that I was taking, and I wanted to actually use that video to talk about oneness. However, I feel like this links so much better talking about cultural appreciation, so I'm actually going to use that in today's video and share that with you and expand upon that as we talk about cultural appreciation. So roll the clip. Today I'm going to be sharing with you part of my DNA story as I'm working through learning my DNA roots. So if you're in the UK, you may have recently seen or watched Ant and Dec's DNA journey on ITV. I'm sure there are many other DNA journeys and television programs and documentaries out there, but I just happened to watch this one. And recently I've been through experience of loss of two members of my family, two relatives I was particularly close to, and I felt when I was watching the DNA journey with Ant and Dec that I would like to discover more about my DNA, about my heritage, my ancestry. And so I sent off for one of the Ancestry DNA boxes, and I am going to take the test or do the test, send it off and wait and see what the results were. And I thought it might be quite interesting to share this with you if you've been thinking about doing the same thing. Perhaps it might be helpful to see what's inside the box if you have been considering it for a while and perhaps aren't really sure whether to go ahead with it. So inside the box there's all the information and details that you need. It starts off with a little welcome package which tells you how to use the kit and how to make your sample. And then there's this, which is a special collection bag. And you have your sample tester kit, which is for your saliva. And then you also have your prepaid box to package it off and send it for the testing. And then you need to activate it online, and it gives you all the details inside the box, how to do it and how to send it off, and it's all obviously free to send off and have it tested. And I believe it takes around 6 to 8 weeks for them to search the databases and create and find the DNA markers that you have and connect you with that and your history and your ancestry. I don't know what kind of things will come up, so it'll be really interesting to see what comes up and what my lineage may be, and extending beyond what I know from my close family and relatives already. I just thought it'd be really interesting and exciting to see where else in the world my DNA is connected to, where else my ancestors may well have originated or been. So I will pop back when I get my results in 6 to 8 weeks and record the second half of this video and let you know how the results get on. So it is currently November 2019, and I imagine I'll get my results sometime early 2020. So it will be really interesting to start the new year, or the new decade even, with this new information about myself and my lineage and my ancestry. So interestingly enough, I received my results for my DNA test probably about 3 weeks after, and it was kind of what I expected. I knew there was going to be Welsh in there, I knew there'd be obviously English in there, and I knew that there would be French because my maternal grandmother was French. One of the things that did surprise me is that what came up was French Basque DNA, which is really cool actually. Side note, I looked up Basque DNA and it's actually really different from the rest of Europe, because when all the farming communities travelled over from the east, the Basque communities very much stayed up in the mountains, up in their areas, didn't come down, didn't mix, didn't make babies. So there's actually like a completely different DNA strand for Basque people. That's the Basque, obviously the French and the Spanish. So that's really cool, by the way. That's just a little bit of interesting history there for you, which I found really cool to look up. So that was back in about December 2019, you know, before the world almost ended in 2020. And then in about September 2020, I received an email update from the Ancestry website. I used Ancestry to do my DNA test. There are obviously loads of other DNA sites that you can use. I had already been signed up to it, so it made sense that I use that for my DNA test, but obviously go with what feels right for you if you wanted to take a DNA test. And I really recommend that you do, by the way. It's such a great way to connect to your roots, your culture, and your heritage and your lineage, especially if you're not really aware of what that is, or if you think you know, then sometimes actually it's really cool to find out where exactly that is. So I received an update, I think it was about early September. It was literally completely different, or at least it was more specific. So more and more people had taken DNA tests, which meant that they could be more specific with where your DNA came from and kind of hone regions down. So in the past it had been Wales and England together, and now they've made Wales and England separate. So initially my DNA came back as 53% English, and that was broken down into Welsh and Cornish. And then it was Ireland and Scotland 32%, and then Basque, and then French, and then obviously there was a little bit of Norway in there, because if you're English, it's very likely you're going to have some Norway in you. Does that sound weird? You know what I mean. But then when my results came back updated, it was 26% Scottish, 25% Welsh, 19% Irish, and then in there was suddenly Spanish, as well as the French and the Basque, which I did not expect Spanish at all. And I asked my uncle about it and he said, oh yeah, we have you know, Spanish relatives. That's where, I don't know if it was like my great-great-grandpa or something came from. So I guess they must have travelled up from Spain and stayed in the Basque, or married somebody from the Basque region and then married a French person. I don't know, but that's really cool. So I actually have more Spanish in me than I do French and Basque put together, which is kind of weird. And it's not even like it's 1 or 2%, like it's between, say, I mean, they kind of do averages, obviously, because they can't know for 100%, but it's between like 5 and 20% for those three each. So that's really interesting to me and not what I expect. And I definitely didn't expect that the highest percentage would be Scottish. And I think they're talking about the lower region of Scotland, so that's kind of very north, very low Scotland. So it could just be that it's extremely northern. But I guess if they're able to differentiate between Irish and Scottish and Welsh and English, then I will take that as read and trust that for now. I mean, basically I need to get my mum to do a test. And unfortunately I can't obviously get my grandparents, they both passed away last year, so I can't get them to take a DNA test to see what their ancestry was, so I know exactly which paternal or maternal line it comes from. But anyway, really interesting, really recommend it. But what was really interesting for me is I had never connected to my Celtic roots ever, so this was an opportunity for me to see how much of a Celtic connection I have and to really delve into that. So one of the things that I did was I bought a book all about the Isle of Many Gods, and it's talking about pagan gods and goddesses worshipped in ancient Britain. So when I realised that I had such a Celtic root, I thought, okay, in order to be more culturally appropriate and to be appreciating other cultures properly, I need to connect to my culture, my roots, my lineage. So I need to be connecting mostly to my Celtic roots, because even though I have this Spanish, Basque and French connection, it's smaller. So I would feel less inclined to say, oh, I'm going to focus on, you know, Spanish culture, because there's just a smaller percentage. We don't want to take the mick. You know, if I don't have that 1% Norway, that might just be included in the 12 or whatever percent British or English that I have, but I wouldn't use that then as an excuse to connect to Norse gods and goddesses. Like, that's such a small percentage. But if you've got a sizable percentage of your DNA connected to a culture, it's really important that you connect with that, because that's part of who you are and that's part of who your ancestors were, and that's part of ancestral work, ancestral healing, ancestral connection for the family is to connect with that. So maybe traveling to the place where your ancestors lived can be a really powerful way to appreciate and respect your heritage, your lineage, your culture that your ancestors and therefore you come from. So I think it's really interesting. In a way, you kind of have the culture that you grew up in, because many people travel, so they don't always grow up where their ancestral line came from. And then you also have your ancestral lineage and culture, which is fascinating. So I did grow up in the UK, and therefore I do have that kind of upbringing. But my mum was actually really focused on her French connection. So for my mum, she loved her French heritage, and that's very much the kind of food that she brought me up on, the kind of lifestyle she brought me up on. So I very much have connected to that side of myself and not remotely to the Celtic side. Following this DNA test, I thought, well, actually, in order to be more culturally appropriate and to appreciate other cultures and my own, I should connect to my own. You know, I should take the time to research the history of the British Isles and all the Celtic pagan gods and just all of that. Like, it's really interesting to me. So that's what I've been spending time doing. And this is a way to be culturally appropriate, not appropriating, and a way to appreciate other cultures by connecting to yours. So I highly recommend taking time to find out and research your heritage, your culture that your family comes from, and the one that you've been brought up in. So there's the balance between the two, and that's what's going to really help you to be more appropriate when you're connecting to things in daily life, because you know where you came from, you've connected to that, you've honored that, and therefore all you can do is either appreciate other cultures by supporting them, you know, supporting local artists or small businesses, so that you're appreciating their culture but not trying to take it on as your own or absorb it and act as if it's yours originally, but really appreciating, respect it and honor it. So one of the things that I have done is I bought an oracle deck, which you will have seen in an unboxing where I talked about it. It's the Mists of Avalon deck that connects to my heritage now. I also bought this book, The Isle of Many Gods, which talks about pagan gods and goddesses throughout ancient Britain, which is actually really interesting because one of the things that the book says is that a lot of the history throughout, you know, the British Isles was oral. So people spoke it, they shared stories. And therefore, when the Romans came over, a lot of that was lost because they didn't have any physical copy of their culture and their beliefs and their gods and their goddesses and the way that they did things, their rites, their rituals, their belief system, for example. A lot of that was lost. And instead, obviously, the Roman gods and goddesses came in, and the influence of the Roman Empire. So a couple of Egyptian gods and goddesses are actually mentioned in the book because they came over as well through the Roman Empire. So what's really interesting to me is, in order for me to appreciate my own culture, my own heritage, is to connect with the fact that a lot of the history is lost. And at the same time, obviously, connecting to nature is a huge part of pretty much any culture, because you would appreciate what you had around you and honor it. So there would have been gods and goddesses for the nature, but having the exact names I don't have, but that's okay because I can either look at the pagan ones and connect through that way, the ones that are recommended in this book, for example, but also I can look at the Celtic ones, you know, I can look at the Irish and the Welsh, probably have a bit more of a written history of their gods and goddesses than the English do. But I just want to focus on actually appreciating your culture and making peace with the fact that you might not be able to find the exact root or the exact belief system or way that life was led in that culture that you're connected to, but still being able to appreciate what you can find and work with that and connect with that. The phone's going. How much do you want to bet that it's telesales? If you take the opportunity and the time to connect to your roots, your ancestral roots, and the culture that you've been brought up in, because you'll definitely feel a connection to that, unless of course you really don't, which is fair enough. But on the whole, you'll have those two sides of yourself which you can connect with and really research, explore, take the time to get to know that. How can that serve you? How can you incorporate things from your own culture into your life? So how can I incorporate Celtic elements into my life more? How can I appreciate that Celtic side of myself and honor it and work with it, as opposed to ignoring it or denying it or trying to seek what I really need from another culture? It's already there, you already have it in your own culture, so just connect with it, see how it can help you, And that is where the cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation comes in. If you're culturally appropriating, maybe you haven't really connected to your own culture, to your own roots, and therefore you can't appreciate. So it's like a seesaw effect. So taking the time to really get to know yourself and your heritage. And I understand that for some people, if you've been adopted or orphaned, or if you don't know a family member, it can be a little bit more difficult to find out maybe your immediate family's history. But I would recommend taking a DNA test. That's what I did because I don't know half of my family at all. So I wanted to understand myself and connect and get to know more about myself. And through that process, I've learned something amazing, which is this Celtic connection, which I'm now researching and connecting to, so I can really appreciate my own culture and other cultures, because I'm coming from a space of I'm centered and strong in my foundation, in my core of who I am and what my culture is about. Therefore, I can respect other cultures more. So I just really invite you to take that time to do the research, to connect. It may involve taking a DNA test. It may involve just chatting to relatives. It may involve, searching some records or doing some online digging. But just do whatever you can to find out more about yourself, your own culture, and your own background through your ancestral line, and really connect to that. Even if you've never met any of your ancestors, you can still connect to them. There is still work that you can do to connect to them. So I will actually link somebody in the description box who works with healing your ancestral line, who I have connected with and worked with. You may enjoy her work. You may already know somebody who you enjoy their work. Find what feels true to you with everything. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video and you can take away how important it is to appreciate your own culture so that you can therefore appreciate other cultures. And I will see you in next week's video.